Chapter 2491, Basic Mana Control. He decoded it. Chapter 2491, Basic Mana Control. He decoded it. Something like this is actually breakable. As the black fog disappeared, silence fell over the group of players as they stared at Shifeng in astonishment. They were 100 times more shocked than when the mana density around Shifeng had increased due to his mana control. The demon god's temptation temples had survived since ancient times, and the main god system had set the rules that governed them. Players had no choice but to follow these rules if they wished to complete the demon god's temptation. Not even the various superpowers could manage to get around these rules. None of God's domain's players would even dream of breaking these rules, since they had already accepted the main god system's rules as an integral part of their lives. However, Shifeng hadn't just refused to follow these rules. He actually broke them. He had shaken their very understanding of God's domain. He succeeded. How is this possible? Thunder Beast stared at Shifeng in shock. He could hardly believe what was happening, yet with the results of Shifeng's efforts before him, he couldn't deny it. Is he really a player? Thunder Beast began to suspect that Shifeng wasn't actually another player, but an NPC in disguise. First, Shifeng had displayed mana control that rivaled Tier 4 magical class NPCs. Then, he had successfully decoded the magic arrays that sealed the temple. Neither feat should be possible for current players. It's no wonder why Divine Tribe was willing to work with him, even without demanding some of the Starlight Fortress's shares and going as far as to station so many of its members in the fortress. Is this his true trump card? Hell Rush could not help his bitter smile as he watched the magic arrays around the temple lose power. Hell Rush had assumed Zero Wing had gotten extremely lucky to obtain a dragon and a fortress prison after capturing the Starlight Fortress. These factors were the very reasons that the Hell Legion hadn't been able to cause trouble for the fortress. Still, he hadn't felt particularly threatened by Zero Wing's small group. The guild's foundations in the west were pathetically weak, even with 5 experts that had unlocked their mana body's full potential. A handful of players wasn't enough to influence a guild's standing in the overall competition between God's domain's many guilds, especially in the competition between the various superpowers. The various superpowers might not have the strength to take the Starlight Fortress now, but they could rely on another method, stealing the Fortress Lord's token. Although the Fortress Lord's token was heavily guarded, it couldn't be removed from the fortress. Normally, the ruling individual could only store the token in the Fortress Lord's mansion behind heavy security. All the various superpowers needed to do was send enough experts to siege the Starlight Fortress and its Fortress Lord's mansion. Not even a dragon could stop an army of hundreds of thousands or millions of experts. Furthermore, the various superpowers had tools they could use to pin the dragon down for a short time. Stealing the fortress from Zero Wing was entirely possible. It would be costly, but as long as the superpowers were willing to cooperate, they could accomplish the feat. Seeing the swordsman before him now, however, Hell Rush doubted that even the various superpowers' combined forces would be able to take the Starlight Fortress from this man. With Shifeng's mana control and knowledge of magic arrays, no player could threaten his hold on the fortress at this stage of the game. God's domain's automatic magic arrays and those under a player's control had different effects. The various superpowers had conducted their own secret experiments to test this concept. Unfortunately, controlling a city's defensive magic array was incredibly difficult. Not only did players need sufficient understanding of magic arrays, but they also needed sufficient mana control. This was why NPC cities were so difficult to capture. Ordinary players might assume that major NPC cities' defensive magic arrays were simply stronger than those in guild cities, but that wasn't truly the case. The defensive magic arrays in NPC cities were only slightly stronger than those in guild cities, but because NPC cities were guarded by Tier 4 NPCs, there were NPCs that were responsible for manipulating the city's defensive magic array. These NPCs would strengthen the array until the barrier could even withstand Tier 5 NPCs' attacks for a long time. If the Starlight Fortress had someone to control its defensive magic array, what chance did the various superpowers have to break through it? While the Hell Legion's members were confused and stunned, excitement overwhelmed Shifeng. Thank goodness, I made it. After 3 hours of desperate study, he had finally grasped the profound concepts of the 7 elements. He still couldn't execute any of Holy Annihilation's 3 moves, but he now had basic mana control. He could now draw master magic arrays based on the 4 major elements movement patterns. Normally, only Tier 3 magical class NPCs could perform the task. He was still far from having the mana control to rival Tier 4 magical class NPCs. To reach that standard, he'd have to draw simple magic arrays with the 3 supreme elements. Once one could do so, they'd be able to create their own mana domains, which were far more powerful than using a skill or spell to form a domain. Even so, Shifeng was satisfied with his progress. Only a small number of the Tier 6 mage gods from his previous life had reached this standard at Tier 3. Most had only made so much progress after reaching Tier 4. Fortunately, he only needed to possess basic mana control to decode the magic arrays protecting the temple. As an additional bonus, he was now on the brink of becoming an intermediate master magician thanks to the Holy Annihilation legacy. Decoding these arrays proved far easier than it had been, and he completed the task in no time. His success also excited Aqua Rose and the other Zero Wing experts. Now that the magic arrays had been decoded, they had a chance of claiming the temple's inferior legendary treasure chest. If they could get their hands on that treasure chest, Zero Wing might gain another fragmented legendary item, which meant the guild could gain another Apex expert. Before Aqua Rose and her companions could celebrate, however, a 7-meter-tall figure in pitch-black armor and wearing a horned helmet appeared within the temple. This figure also wielded a pitch-black axe, ready for battle. The moment the figure appeared, the temple began to radiate an intense amount of divine might. Even Hell Rush and his legion, who stood over 300 yards away from the temple, were overwhelmed by a sense of dread. Demon God, Atlock, God's Phantom, Mythic, level 120 HP? Everyone gasped when they saw Atlock's attributes. Level 120? Even Shifeng stared at Atlock with a grim expression. NPCs weren't like players. Every 5 levels, they received a massive strength boost. A level 120 NPC's combat power was in a completely different league than that of a level 110 NPC. Right now, Atlock was even stronger than the Silver Divine Dragon, Auerbeck. "Are you really going in there, guild leader?" Aqua Rose asked worriedly. She had been confident of their chances of securing the inferior legendary treasure chest before she had seen Atlock, but after witnessing the demon god's phantom for herself, she realized how wrong she had been. She wouldn't last more than 5 seconds against the phantom. Even from so far away, the demon god's divine might reduced her combat power by at least 30%. She'd lose even more once she was within attack range. "I've already gone this far. I have to try," Shifeng said, gritting his teeth. The demon god's temptation appeared at random. One would have to be incredibly lucky to encounter one. If this demon god's temptation had only housed an epic treasure chest, he would have dismissed it without a thought, but he'd be wrought with regret if he gave up on an inferior legendary treasure chest without trying his best. Even after a decade in God's domain, fragmented legendary items had been extremely rare, and every one was a priceless treasure. Although Shifeng remembered a few clues that would lead to fragmented legendary items, whether or not he could claim them was another matter altogether. Since he had a high chance of securing a fragmented legendary item now, how could he walk away without putting up a fight? His opponent might be a level 120, Tier 4 demon god, but he still had a chance of victory. He didn't actually have to fight the phantom. He just needed to buy enough time to take the treasure chest and get out. After giving his answer, Shifeng approached the temple. "What? He's really going in?" Thunder Beast gaped in shock. Words were no longer sufficient to describe the demon god's strength. Just having the courage to enter the temple was impressive, not to mention fighting Atlock. That demon god could likely even instant kill Tier 4 NPCs, let alone current Tier 3 players. There was no way to buy time with such an opponent on one's heels. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shifeng had decoded the temple's outer magic arrays, allowing players to enter and leave the temple freely and use magic tools, but the temple's inner magic array remained intact. The inner magic array ensured that only one player could enter the temple at a time. In other words, Shifeng would have to face the Tier 4 demon god by himself. How much time could he possibly buy himself? Puny adventurer, You are capable and brave. You've decoded the magic array I had set up outside, and you even dare to enter my temple after seeing my phantom, Atlock addressed Shifeng, a hint of recognition lacing his tone. However, his words also contained a trace of anger. But, this ends now. Since you have dared to break my trial, I will eliminate you from this world. After saying so, the intensity of Atlock's divine might skyrocketed, and it felt as if a 1-ton weight had been dropped on Shifeng's shoulders. Even walking became a challenge. Sure enough, taking on a Tier 4 god's phantom won't be easy. Shifeng flashed Atlock a bitter smile as the phantom's divine might swept over him. I can only try my luck. Following which, Shifeng pulled a summon guard scroll from his bag and called Anna to his side. Chapter 2492, Apex Battle. Chapter 2492, Apex Battle. Now that the temple's outer magic array had been disabled, players could summon personal guards inside the temple. As Shifeng activated the summon guard scroll, a summoning array appeared before him, and as it completed, a blonde woman in luxurious crimson robes emerged. The moment this woman appeared, the mana, which had frozen due to Atlock's incredible divine might, began to relax and move. Shifeng also felt some of the pressure on him subside, making it far easier to move. What a high-leveled personal guard! Thunder Beast exclaimed when he saw Anna. Anna had already reached level 119, while the strongest personal guard in Netherworld Empire had only reached level 115. Anna was undoubtedly the highest-leveled personal guard Thunder Beast had ever seen. Although the gap only consisted of 4 levels, the amount of EXP those 4 levels required was astronomical. What is he trying to do? Is he planning on throwing away his personal guard's life as well as his own? When Hell Rush saw Shifeng summon Anna, he was sure the swordsman had gone mad. Anna's level was high, but Atlock was level 120. There was a considerable difference between a level 119 NPC and a level 120 NPC. Most importantly, Anna was only Tier 3, whereas Atlock was Tier 4. Factoring in the difference between their life ratings, Anna didn't even have a chance of serving as a distraction to buy time. The demon god would kill her instantly. Shifeng was simply insane for summoning his personal guard here. Before Hell Rush and his companions could say more, however, Anna began to chant an incantation. A gigantic, 3-fold magic array then appeared on the temple's ceiling, illuminating the dusky temple and surrounding area with its dazzling, golden glow. After a moment, a woman in silvery white armor with 3 pairs of pure white feathery wings slowly descended from the golden magic array. How is that possible? A Tier 4 higher Valkyrie. Every member of the Hell Legion stated at the Valkyrie with wide, shocked eyes. Players on the Western continent were quite familiar with the concept of Valkyries. The continent's major NPC cities generally summoned these beings when they fought powerful demonic creature armies. Valkyries were considered major NPC cities' trump cards. Higher Valkyries, on the other hand, had the life rating to rival dragons. They were nigh-invincible among those of the same tier. A dark dragon had once assaulted a border city in the west, and the War God's Temple's branch temple master had stepped up and summoned a higher Valkyrie to save his city. Facing both the branch temple master and his higher Valkyrie, the dark dragon had been forced to retreat. And now, Shifeng revealed that he, too, could summon a higher Valkyrie. Even if he did so by relying on his personal guard, the fact that he had this ability would shock all on the Western continent. A Tier 4 higher Valkyrie was even stronger than a Tier 4 hero of the same level, and the Valkyrie would have no issues destroying a minor NPC city by themselves. Moreover, unlike the Silver Divine Dragon, Shifeng's higher Valkyrie wasn't chained to the Starlight Fortress, L. He could take this Valkyrie wherever he went and summon her to aid him in battle. Just how many trump cards does he have? Hell Rush was at a loss for words. Not only was Shifeng's mana control and combat power extraordinary, but he could also summon a higher Valkyrie whenever it pleased him. He was practically a one-man army. If the various superpowers that wanted to assassinate Shifeng found out about this, they'd likely abandon any such thought in an instant. Once the higher Valkyrie had joined the battle, Shifeng activated the Ring of Gospel's miniature world and Ring of Brilliance. The projected world extended its power to suppress the demon god while Ring of Brilliance boosted the higher Valkyrie's attributes. A higher Valkyrie and world projection? A hint of interest flashed in Atlok's gaze when he saw his new opponent. It seems you are quite capable, adventurer. Unfortunately, all your efforts are useless against my phantom doppelganger. Suddenly, Miniature World's power stopped 100 yards away from the demon god. Not even Miniature World's projection can suppress him? Shifeng was astonished to see Miniature World prove ineffective against Atlok. As expected of a god's phantom, this won't be easy. He had known that a god's phantom wasn't an ordinary NPC. His only hope in activating Miniature World was that it would barely suppress Atlok. However, Miniature World's power couldn't even reach the demon god, much less suppress it. Fortunately, Shifeng had prepared for this, and he immediately activated the hero's tome. A pillar of light then rose within the temple, and a man in white clothing and wielding a golden sword stepped out of the light. Arslet, Hero, Tier 4, Sword Saint, Level 131 HP 112 000000112 0000000. This was the main reason Shifeng had dared to challenge a demon god's phantom. A Tier 4 hero's life rating couldn't compare to that of a demon god's phantom, but with Arslet's higher level, he could be able to mitigate much of Atlok's advantage. Meanwhile, Arslet's arrival had rendered the Hell Legion speechless. First, Shifeng had called forth a Tier 4 higher Valkyrie, and now, a Tier 4 hero. He was practically out to decimate both heaven and earth. Go! Once Arslet had joined the battle, Shifeng didn't hesitate to give the command to attack. The higher Valkyrie and Arslet attacked the demon god simultaneously, moving so fast that not even Tier 3 experts could keep up. Only Fire Dance and the others, who had fully unlocked mana bodies, barely caught sight of the two Tier 4 beings as they moved. While the two NPCs began their assault, Shifeng activated Heavenly Dragon's power and charged toward the inferior legendary treasure chest in the core of the temple. Normally, the combination of a Tier 4 higher Valkyrie and a Tier 4 hero would be a disaster wherever they went, but against the Tier 4 demon god's phantom, they were nothing. Short of enlisting the help of a divine dragon of the same level, stopping an ancient god's phantom would be utterly impossible. Shifeng only hoped that the two summoned NPCs could buy him as much time as possible. He didn't need a lot, 20 or 30 seconds would be enough. Treasure chests within demon god's temptations were never locked, and inferior legendary treasure chests were no exception. Players would be able to open any treasure chest they found in a demon god's temptation, although activating the chest would still require 20 seconds. During his previous life, the first independent player to successfully loot a demon god's temptation had only succeeded because he had possessed an ancient magic crystal and the Tier 5 defensive spell it had contained. Although the ancient magic crystal had been a single-use item, the spell within had allowed the independent player to survive the 20-second activation time and retreat from the temple with the prize. If not for that Tier 5 defensive spell, the independent player would never have survived to claim the treasure, even after decoding the temple's outer magic array. Unfortunately, Shifeng didn't have a Tier 5 defensive magic scroll or any tool that could protect him from a Tier 5 being's attacks. He could only rely on the higher Valkyrie and Arslet to distract the demon god's phantom long enough for him to escape. As Shifeng slid up to the inferior legendary treasure chest, two explosions rang out behind him. Two figures had been thrown into one of the temple's walls, the higher Valkyrie and Arslet. Both bore visible wounds. Obviously, the demon god's attack had repelled them, and they had each lost a significant chunk of their HPs. The difference between the two sides' combat power was clear. This was more of a one-sided slaughter than a battle. Every player outside of the temple gaped in shock after witnessing that first strike. The two NPCs could decimate a minor NPC city on their own, yet the demon god had sent both powerhouses flying with a single attack. None of them could imagine what kind of power a player would need to clear this trial. Shifeng had already found a cheat-like loophole to tackle the demon god's temptation, allowing him to use magic tools in the battle, and yet he was still at such a despairing disadvantage. If one tackled this challenge normally, not even a Tier 5 player would survive, much less a Tier 4 player. Moreover, that was assuming the demon god's phantom would still be Tier 4. Fortunately, neither summoned being was a player. They had incredibly high HPs. Even for the demon god, killing them should take at least 20 seconds. Foolish human. You dare to steal my treasure. I will obliterate you. Atlock bellowed when he noticed Shifeng activating the inferior legendary treasure chest. A ball of silver fire then appeared in Atlock's free hand, and it grew as the seconds ticked by. After just 2 seconds, the fireball had grown to the size of a 2-story building. Once Atlock was satisfied with the size of his fireball, he hurled it at Shifeng. Shifeng felt the threat of death as the silver flames approached, and he immediately instructed the higher Valkyrie and Arslet to use their strongest moves to defend him. The higher Valkyrie responded by throwing her Spear of Thunder at the demon god, while Arslet executed a Tier 4 taboo skill, Dimensional Flurry. Boom! The temple shook violently when the attacks landed, and the silver fireball dissipated, saving Shifeng from certain death. Despicable ant, do you think your little tricks are enough to stop me? Atlock's rage grew after the higher Valkyrie and Arslet countered his fireball, and he raised his axe, swinging it at both summoned beings. Space before the demon god's phantom shattered, forming multiple spatial tiers that reached for Shifeng's summoned guards. A mana technique. The attack felt unsettlingly familiar to Shifeng. It was so similar to Eliadai's third sword, Holy Annihilation. However, a Tier 4 god's phantom had used this move, not a Tier 3, Heavenly Blue Saint. Neither the higher Valkyrie nor Arslet could counter this attack, and it sent both flying into the temple's walls once more. This time, the temple's solid walls began to crack. Both summoned beings were now heavily injured. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You foolish thief. Now it's your turn, Atlock roared, sneering as he turned toward Shifeng. Atlock then swung his axe at the swordsman, who stood over 50 yards away. Space before Shifeng started to break, and spatial tears flew toward Shifeng like a torrent of water. Realizing that the higher Valkyrie and Arslet couldn't come to his rescue this time, Shifeng gritted his teeth and activated the 7 Luminaries' Ring's absolute domain. Block it. Chapter 2493, Holding Back a Demon God. It's over. Chapter 2493, Holding Back a Demon God. It's over. Isn't this demon god's phantom a little too strong? Everyone gaped as they watched Atlock's attack fly toward Shifeng. That attack was as powerful as a large-scale destruction spell, and it didn't even have a channeling time. It was also the same move Atlock had used to injure the higher Valkyrie and the Tier 4 hero. If not even those two could endure the attack, what chance did a Tier 3 player like Shifeng have of surviving it? Not even a powerful invulnerability skill could save the swordsman now. There was no such thing as a true invulnerability skill in God's domain. The game's so-called invulnerability skills and spells were merely defensive skills and spells that could block an opponent's attack and absorb the damage. However, if the opponent's attack were more powerful than the defensive skill or spell's damage tolerance, players would receive some of the damage. Based on Atlock's displays of power thus far, he definitely had Tier 5 strength. He might even be powerful enough to rival Tier 5 dragons. Not even an NPC's defensive magic array could handle that kind of power. At most, players' current invulnerability skills and spells could block Tier 4 attacks. They'd be utterly useless against Tier 5 attacks. The few horribly unlucky pairs to encounter Tier 5 beings had tried to use invulnerability skills and spells, yet they had died instantly. The shattered space within the temple rapidly reached toward Shifeng, covering a large enough area that it was impossible to evade. Suddenly, however, golden, divine runes appeared around the swordsman, radiating an indescribably sacred feeling. Boom! An intense explosion shook the temple, and the impact's shockwave even reached the Hell Legion. Atlock certainly had the power to decimate heaven and earth. Sure enough, this trial is a trap. There's no way players can clear it. Every member of the Hell Legion shook their head and sighed as clouds of dust obscured the temple. If Atlock hadn't used such an unbeatable move, Shifeng might have secured the inferior legendary treasure chest with the help of his higher Valkyrie and Tier 4 hero. Unfortunately, the demon god's phantom was too powerful. Current players had no hope against it. Seeing this, Zero Wing's members wore grim expressions. Shifeng and Zero Wing could recover if he suffered a normal death, but if he died in this temple, he'd have to remake his account. Wait. I see a golden light within the temple. Just as everyone assumed the fight was over, someone noticed a faint, golden glow radiating from within the dusky temple. He blocked it. Hell Rush stared at the settling dust clouds and quickly spotted Shifeng, still standing before the inferior legendary treasure chest. The swordsman was battered and had lost more than half of his HP, but the demon god's attack hadn't slain him. Is he even human? When the other Hell Legions saw this, they were beyond astonished. A Tier 5 dragon could destroy an entire city in one hit, but even after taking an attack of that caliber, Shifeng had survived, only losing a little over half of his HP. His defenses were heaven-defying. You're quite lucky, puny adventurer. You managed to break through at the last moment and strengthen the magic array in that despicable ring of yours, Atlock said, glaring at Shifeng. The mana within the temple then turned frosty. However, your luck ends here. That ring can only save you once. Do you think you can block my next attack? Atlock gripped his axe in both hands and raised it above his head. He closed his eyes and began to gather the ambient mana to his weapon. The gathered mana grew so dense that it soon took on physical form. Black hole. With the axe as its core, a miniature black hole formed above Atlock, swallowing everything nearby. Its incredible gravitational pull twisted space around it, sparing nothing. He still hadn't used his full strength. Shifeng could only watch the demon god's phantom with a bitter smile. As Atlock had said, Shifeng had broken through to the intermediate master magician standard at the last moment and manipulated the 7 luminaries ring's magic array. Even so, absolute domain hadn't been strong enough to block all of Atlock's attack. Worse yet, he couldn't use absolute domain again for another several minutes. Even if he could use the skill right now, it wouldn't be able to stop Atlock's miniature black hole. Run while the demon god is charging his attack, guild leader. If you let it hit you, everything we've worked for will be over. We'll have plenty of chances to acquire fragmented legendary items in the future, Aqua Rose shouted in the team chat. The demon god's prior attack had already been terrifying, yet the move Atlock was preparing to use had already increased the temperature within a 600-yard radius to a scorching high. This attack was far more powerful than the previous one. If it hit Shifeng, not even ashes would remain. There's 6 seconds left. Hearing Aqua Rose's urgent advice, Shifeng glanced at the loading bar hovering over the treasure chest. What he saw left him speechless. Atlock, Arslet, and the higher Valkyrie had already exchanged over a dozen moves, and Shifeng had deliberately remained motionless after the demon god's last attack had struck, trying to buy even more time. And yet, only 14 seconds had passed. Shifeng realized that he could no longer rely on the higher Valkyrie and Tier 4 hero, since both had lost a significant portion of their combat power. Escape. Do you honestly think I'll let you? Atlock realized what was going through Shifeng's mind when he saw the swordsman's expression. Sneering, he continued, since you've dared to plunder my treasure chest without passing my trial, only one outcome awaits you. Moreover, the treasure chest contained over 20 items. By the time Shifeng collected the 10th item, Atlock was mad with wrath. You'll never leave this place alive, thief, Atlock bellowed. Shifeng heard the sound of shattering chains, and the demon god's phantom grew from Tier 4 to Tier 5. The phantom now exuded enough power that even Hell Rush and his Hell Legion, who had remained far away from the temple, shuddered in fear. Their instincts screamed at them to flee. Crap. Everyone, run. Shifeng gave Atlock, who was going berserk, a grim look. He hadn't expected the situation to develop like this. After he gave the command to retreat, he promptly used the Tier 3 instantaneous movement scroll he had prepared beforehand. Chapter 2494, Legendary Event. Chapter 2494, Legendary Event. When Shifeng disappeared, Atlock became even more incensed. You think you can escape my grasp, thief? The demon god's eyes narrowed as he shifted his gaze to the forest's southern end. With a cutting hand gesture, Atlock created a spatial gate, stepping into it and leaving only Anna, Arslet, and the higher Valkyrie in the temple. As Atlock left, the temple began to fade away. The players outside of the temple gasped as it did. They had never dreamed that Shifeng would get away, accomplishing a feat that not even the West's various superpowers could overcome. Although Shifeng had relied on a cheat-like method to do so, It was an undeniable fact that he had secured the treasure from a demon god's temptation. What surprised everyone more, however, was the fact that the demon god's phantom had reached Tier 5 at the very last minute. After witnessing the demon god's phantom's combat power at Tier 4, they all knew that it was practically invincible at this stage of the game now that it had reached Tier 5. Destroying an entire empire should be a piece of cake for the being, much less an entire kingdom. Furthermore, the demon god's phantom had left the temple to chase down Shifeng. The situation was simply absurd. "Commander, let's get out of here. If that demon god returns, it won't rest until every last one of us is dead," Thunder Beast urged Hell Rush once Atlock had left through the spatial gate. Even without Shifeng's warning to flee, they knew how dangerous their current predicament was. "Retreat." Hell Rush could only sigh as he glanced toward the forest's southern area. Although Shifeng had secured the treasure, a Tier 5 demon god's phantom was now hunting him. Shifeng's chances of surviving were practically non-existent. An enraged Tier 5 demon god was no trivial existence. Not even a Tier 5 dragon would escape Atlock's wrath. While the Hell Legion and Zero Wings experts pulled back to the passage leading to the Star Tomb's first floor, Shifeng, who had fled by using a Tier 3 instantaneous movement scroll, activated disintegration power, forcing himself to Tier 4. He then activated Gale Domain and flew toward the Star Tomb's exit with as much haste as possible, no slower than a flying mount. Before Shifeng had made it 2,000 yards, however, a spatial gate opened in his path, and Atlock emerged. He teleported here directly? The sight of the demon god's phantom left Shifeng speechless. He hadn't expected Atlock to be this vicious. Based on what Shifeng remembered from his past, the demon god's phantom guarding the temple shouldn't chase after a player once they left the temple with the treasure, yet not only had Atlock continued the chase, but the demon god's phantom had teleported to him, as well. "I will eliminate every trace of your soul from this world, thief." The moment Atlock spotted his prey, he began to chant an incantation. The sky above Shifeng shattered, and an endless torrent of fire descended, covering a 4,000-yard radius. Tier 5 Curse, Extinction Flames. Normally, Tier 5 Divine Mags needed over a dozen seconds to cast this spell, yet Atlock cast it instantaneously. To make matters worse, players couldn't even use Tier 3 instantaneous movement scrolls within Extinction Flames AoE. Noticing the inferno from a distance, the Hell Legion and Zero Wings members were astonished. Even from so far, they could see flames engulf the area above the entire southern forest, threatening to devour the wooded area. How could anybody escape such a terrifying attack? Suddenly a spatial tier opened before the team, and a figure jumped through it. The figure was none other than Shifeng, who looked incredibly miserable. His HP was already in the red. "Guild Leader Black Flame, you actually managed to escape." Hell Rush was surprised to see the swordsman. The rest of the team could only stare at Shifeng in shock. The demon god had clearly used a Tier 5 curse against Shifeng, yet he had escaped with his life. It was unbelievable. "Everyone, get ready. The demon god's phantom hasn't noticed me yet. I'll open a spatial gate that teleports us to the first floor. As soon as it opens, go through it." Shifeng shouted his command when his teammates only stared at him. The only way to flee from a Tier 5 curse like Extinction Flames was to teleport out of range with a Tier 4 instantaneous movement scroll. Although Shifeng didn't have one on hand, he had the 7 Luminaries Ring, an extraordinary life-saving tool. With the 7 Luminaries Ring space movement, he could teleport to any location within a 600,000-yard radius, but when he had jumped into the spatial tear the skill created, the curse's flames had followed, scorching him and nearly taking his life. Fortunately, he had activated disintegration power, which temporarily granted him a Tier 4 player's defense and HP. If he had only relied on Heavenly Dragon's power's defense and HP, that attack would have been the end of him. However, space movement had a 3-minute cooldown. If the demon god came at him again, he wouldn't survive. He couldn't just leave the Hell Legion and his comrades here, and now that Atlock was so furious, the demon god's phantom would transform every inch of the Star Tomb into a land of death. Aqua Rose and the others could only survive if they left the regional dungeon now. Shifeng didn't waste any time in summoning the spatial gate. The rest of his team realized that they were in a race against time, as well, and they charged through the spatial gate the moment it was complete, vanishing from the star tomb's second floor. By the time Atlock had realized what was happening and used space movement himself, everyone had fled through the spatial gate already. Despicable thief! I will never let you get away with this. Atlock roared as the spatial gate disappeared as well. Meanwhile, once Shifeng was outside of the star tomb, he received a system notification. System, you have triggered the legendary quest, Demon God's Wrath. You have stolen Demon God Atlock's treasure, and the Demon God has employed the soul curse against you in retaliation. Not only will Demon God Atlock and his kin hunt you, but you will suffer triple the death penalty. In addition, you will lose 1 level every 7 days. Once your level falls below level 100, the Demon God will find you. Quest content: kill Demon God Atlock's phantom doppelganger. No time limit. Quest reward unknown. As Shifeng received the system notification, everyone else heard the sound of a system announcement. Star Valley Region System Announcement: a player has triggered Star Valley's legendary event, Demon God's Wrath. A Demon God's Shrine will activate in Star Valley in 1 day. Players will have the opportunity to receive the Demon God's legacy at that time. The system announcement repeated 3 times, and all players within Star Valley heard it clearly. For a time, an uproar shook Star Valley to its very core. Chapter 2494, Legendary Event. When Shifeng disappeared, Atlox became even more incensed. You think you can escape my grasp, thief? The Demon God's eyes narrowed as he shifted his gaze to the forest's southern end. With a cutting hand gesture, Atlock created a spatial gate, stepping into it and leaving only Anna, Arslet, and the higher Valkyrie in the temple. As Atlock left, the temple began to fade away. The players outside of the temple gasped as it did. They had never dreamed that Shifeng would get away, accomplishing a feat that not even the West's various superpowers could overcome. Although Shifeng had relied on a cheat-like method to do so, it was an undeniable fact that he had secured the treasure from a demon god's temptation. What surprised everyone more, however, was the fact that the demon god's phantom had reached Tier 5 at the very last minute. After witnessing the demon god's phantom's combat power at Tier 4, they all knew that it was practically invincible at this stage of the game now that it had reached Tier 5. Destroying an entire empire should be a piece of cake for the being, much less an entire kingdom. Furthermore, the demon god's phantom had left the temple to chase down Shifeng. The situation was simply absurd. Commander, let's get out of here. If that demon god returns, it won't rest until every last one of us is dead. Thunder Beast urged Hell Rush once Atlock had left through the spatial gate. Even without Shifeng's warning to flee, they knew how dangerous their current predicament was. Retreat. Hell Rush could only sigh as he glanced toward the forest's southern area. Although Shifeng had secured the treasure, a Tier 5 demon god's phantom was now hunting him. Shifeng's chances of surviving were practically non-existent. An enraged Tier 5 demon god was no trivial existence. Not even a Tier 5 dragon would escape Atlock's wrath. While the Hell Legion and Zero Wings experts pulled back to the passage leading to the Star Tomb's first floor, Shifeng, who had fled by using a Tier 3 instantaneous movement scroll, activated disintegration power, forcing himself to Tier 4. He then activated Gale Domain and flew toward the Star Tomb's exit with as much haste as possible, no slower than a flying mount. Before Shifeng had made it 2,000 yards, however, a spatial gate opened in his path, and Atlock emerged. He teleported here directly? The sight of the demon god's phantom left Shifeng speechless. He hadn't expected Atlock to be this vicious. Based on what Shifeng remembered from his past, the demon god's phantom guarding the temple shouldn't chase after a player once they left the temple with the treasure, yet not only had Atlock continued the chase, but the demon god's phantom had teleported to him, as well. I will eliminate every trace of your soul from this world, thief. The moment Atlock spotted his prey, he began to chant an incantation. The sky above Shifeng shattered, and an endless torrent of fire descended, covering a 4,000-yard radius. Tier 5 Curse, Extinction Flames. Normally, Tier 5 Divine Mags needed over a dozen seconds to cast this spell, yet Atlock cast it instantaneously. To make matters worse, Players couldn't even use Tier 3 instantaneous movement scrolls within Extinction Flames AoE. Noticing the inferno from a distance, the Hell Legion and Zero Wings members were astonished. Even from so far, they could see flames engulf the area above the entire southern forest, threatening to devour the wooded area. How could anybody escape such a terrifying attack? Suddenly a spatial tier opened before the team, and a figure jumped through it. The figure was none other than Shifeng, who looked incredibly miserable. His HP was already in the red. Guild leader Black Flame, you actually managed to escape. Hell Rush was surprised to see the swordsman. The rest of the team could only stare at Shifeng in shock. The demon god had clearly used a Tier 5 curse against Shifeng, yet he had escaped with his life. It was unbelievable. Everyone, get ready. The demon god's phantom hasn't noticed me yet. I'll open a spatial gate that teleports us to the first floor. As soon as it opens, go through it. Shifeng shouted his command when his teammates only stared at him. The only way to flee from a Tier 5 curse like Extinction Flames was to teleport out of range with a Tier 4 instantaneous movement scroll. Although Shifeng didn't have one on hand, he had the 7 Luminaries Ring, an extraordinary life-saving tool. With the 7 Luminaries Ring space movement, he could teleport to any location within a 600,000-yard radius, but when he had jumped into the spatial tear the skill created, the curse's flames had followed, scorching him and nearly taking his life. Fortunately, he had activated disintegration power, which temporarily granted him a Tier 4 player's defense and HP. If he had only relied on Heavenly Dragon's power's defense and HP, that attack would have been the end of him. However, space movement had a 3-minute cooldown. If the demon god came at him again, he wouldn't survive. He couldn't just leave the Hell Legion and his comrades here, and now that Atlock was so furious, the demon god's phantom would transform every inch of the Star Tomb into a land of death. Aqua Rose and the others could only survive if they left the regional dungeon now. Shifeng didn't waste any time in summoning the spatial gate. The rest of his team realized that they were in a race against time, as well, and they charged through the spatial gate the moment it was complete, vanishing from the Star Tomb's second floor. By the time Atlock had realized what was happening and used space movement himself, everyone had fled through the spatial gate already. Despicable thief. I will never let you get away with this. Atlock roared as the spatial gate disappeared as well. Meanwhile, once Shifeng was outside of the Star Tomb, he received a system notification. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU system. You have triggered the legendary quest, Demon God's Wrath. You have stolen Demon God Atlock's treasure, and the Demon God has employed the soul curse against you in retaliation. Not only will Demon God Atlock and his kin hunt you, but you will suffer triple the death penalty. In addition, you will lose 1 level every 7 days. Once your level falls below level 100, the Demon God will find you. Quest content: kill Demon God Atlock's phantom doppelganger. No time limit. Quest reward unknown. As Shifeng received the system notification, everyone else heard the sound of a system announcement. Star Valley Region System Announcement. A player has triggered Star Valley's legendary event, Demon God's Wrath. A Demon God's Shrine will activate in Star Valley in 1 day. Players will have the opportunity to receive the Demon God's legacy at that time. The system announcement repeated 3 times, and all players within Star Valley heard it clearly. For a time, an uproar shook Star Valley to its very core. Chapter 2495, Star Valley Shaken. Star Valley has a Demon God's legacy, L. Chapter 2495, Star Valley Shaken. Star Valley has a Demon God's legacy, L. What's going on? The system is releasing a God's legacy? Won't it make players invincible in God's domain? The Demon God's Shrine? I have to check it out. After the system announcement, many players in Star Valley practically glowed with excitement. They wanted nothing more than to charge toward the Demon God's Shrine to investigate the event. In God's domain, legacies were even more important than weapons and equipment. Legacies could transform players' foundations, setting them up with a more advanced starting point than others. With a powerful legacy, players could also learn stronger skills or spells. They could even obtain top-tier weapons and equipment that were specific to their legacy. An ordinary legacy could boost an ordinary player into the ranks of experts. However, legacies were incredibly rare in God's domain, even rarer than epic items. Most importantly, legacies weren't publicly available. Players could only obtain one through luck. And yet, not only did the Demon God's Shrine offer a legacy to the general public, but the system had also declared that it was a Demon God's legacy. This wasn't just some random legacy, barely related to the Demon God. Why wouldn't players go crazy over this news? God's legacies were the highest-ranking legacies in God's domain. Even the various super guilds' big shots dreamed of obtaining one. Unfortunately, God's legacies were so rare that players could only find them if they were truly lucky. While the players in Star Valley were in an uproar, news had reached the various superpowers. What? A Demon God's legacy? Someone has managed to uncover a Demon God's legacy. Look into this matter immediately. Find out who was responsible for activating the Demon God's Shrine. That player must have more details about the development. I want all of our guild's Tier 3 experts sent to Star Valley immediately. We must secure the Demon God's legacy before the other powers. The various superpowers went mad when they learned of the Demon God's Shrine, dispatching organized expert teams to Star Valley. They also ordered investigations into the player responsible for activating the shrine. For a time, the various powers experts and independent experts flooded Star Valley. While all of these players gathered, hunting for the Demon God's Shrine, silence reigned over the Hell Legion, which rested a short distance away from the Star Tomb. None of them were sure whether they should congratulate Shifeng or pity him. None were more familiar with the situation than they were. Shifeng was responsible for activating the Demon God's Shrine in Star Valley and for the availability of a God's legacy, yet he couldn't have anything to do with it. This legendary event was the main god system's way of ridiculing the swordsman. The situation also changed what they understood about God's domain. Shifeng had already turned their understanding of the game upside down, yet this legendary event had gone beyond that. Despite contributing the most to this legendary event's activation, Shifeng had the lowest chance of obtaining the event's reward. It almost seemed like the demon god, Atlok, were deliberately spiting Shifeng for his wit. Although Shifeng had acquired the inferior legendary treasure chest's contents, he had no chance of obtaining this god's legacy. Atlok was acting as vindictive as any human. Hell Legion's members even wondered if the demon god was human, with human emotions, rather than a computer program. That was a god's legacy they were talking about. Such a legacy was many times more precious than a fragmented legendary item. The two weren't even in the same realm in terms of their value. Is it really necessary to go so far over an inferior legendary treasure chest? Shifeng gave the system notification a bitter smile. Normally, the demon god's temptation should have ended the moment he escaped the temple. That was the outcome every player that had plundered a demon god's temptation had met with during his past life, but for some reason, his situation turned out to be wildly different. Not only had the demon god continued to chase him after he had left the temple, but Atlok had even posted a bounty on his head. He had even offered a god's legacy as the bounty's reward. This was just absurd. It's just a god's legacy, guild leader. It's not worth our time, Kola said, clicking his tongue as he read the system announcement. Right. We're strong enough that we'll have plenty of chances to obtain other gods' legacies in the future, Aqua Rose added, nodding in agreement. Although Kola and Aqua Rose tried to reassure their guild leader, the Hell Legion's members realized that they were simply putting up a strong front. They were talking about a god's legacy, after all. Only the most fortunate players had a chance to obtain one. Moreover, based on how this event had been triggered when Shifeng slipped through Atlok's grasp, the requirements to obtain the legacy likely involved targeting Shifeng. NPCs often hunted down God's Domain's players, but since the gods couldn't appear on the continent right now, Atlok was forced to post a bounty. Guild leader Black Flame, you don't need to be concerned about this. The demon god might be using a god's legacy as bait, but obtaining it will likely be a major challenge. This might even be another of the demon god's traps. At least you managed to get your hands on the treasures in that chest, Hell Rush said, trying to console Shifeng. Thank you for your concern, Commander Rush, But I don't really mind the situation, Shifeng said, smiling at Hell Rush when he saw the man's pity. He didn't actually care that Atlock had placed a bounty on his head. He was far more concerned about the tripled death penalty and weekly level reduction, but as long as he took extra care and maintained his leveling speed, the penalties shouldn't pose a problem. While the Demon God's legacy might be more valuable than a fragmented legendary item, perhaps even more than a legendary item, he had no desire for it. Atlock's legacy was on par with Aqua Rose's Sea God's legacy. At most, it was a peak legacy. Moreover, Hell Rush didn't know that Atlock wasn't the only demon god after his life. He had plenty of time bombs threatening his life in God's domain. What was one more? If offending a demon god meant that he could get his hands on a fragmented legendary item, he didn't mind offending a few more. None of the Hell Legion's members believed Shifeng's claim, however. They had all witnessed the swordsman's strength. If anyone had a chance of obtaining the demon god's legacy, it'd be Shifeng, but since the man in question had brushed the issue off, they could only nod and smile in response. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU right, guild leader, what did you get from the treasure chest? Kola eagerly asked, ignoring the Hell Legion's skeptical looks. Kola's question reminded Shifeng that he hadn't inspected the items. He immediately opened his back to see what he had won. He had been too busy fleeing for his life earlier, so he hadn't had the time to investigate his loot. Once he had escaped the Star Tomb, his personal system notification and the regional announcement had demanded his attention. As Shifeng inspected the items, he was stunned. It's no wonder why that demon god's reaction was so extreme. If I had been in his position, I'd have gone crazy, too. When Shifeng saw the crystal radiating divine might in his bag, realization dawned on him. Chapter 2496, Inferior Legendary Treasure Chests Treasures. Chapter 2496, Inferior Legendary Treasure Chests Treasures. What's wrong, guild leader? Aqua Rose asked, curious when she saw Shifeng's odd expression. They had gone to great lengths to loot the shrine's treasure chest. If the items weren't valuable, they'd have suffered a great loss. It's nothing. I'm just surprised by how excellent our harvest is, Shifeng said, chuckling. Not only did we obtain a few legendary materials and the Star of Light I was after, but we've also obtained an epic weapon set, a fragmented legendary item, and a dark gold set equipment forging design. Shifeng then shared the information on the several weapons, equipment, and design he had obtained in the team chat. He had no intention of the items. Absolute Shadow, Dagger, Main Hand, Epic Rank, Level 100, Level 150 equipment requirement, Strength 2-3 attributes adjust according to user's level. Attack power plus 6,325, Level 100, Strength plus 422, Agility plus 376, Endurance plus 350 attack speed plus 18 attacks carry the power of shadows. During attacks, reduce target's defense by 30%, 35% chance to cause 270% damage, 10% chance to trigger Shadow Raid, increasing user's attack speed by 40% for 3 seconds. When equipped, main attribute increased by 10%, secondary attributes increased by 8%, reaction speed increased by 10%, all of weapon skills effects increased by 10%, completion rate with all weapon skills increased by 2%, ignore levels plus 10. Additional passive skill Shadow Strike, every attack accumulates 1 point of shadow energy, independent from sub-absolute shadow. When 12 points of shadow energy have been accumulated, all shadow energy will automatically release, increasing user's strength by 100%. Set effect when both main and sub-absolute shadow are equipped, main attribute increased by an additional 15%, secondary attributes increased by an additional 10%, physique increased by an additional 15%, gain the finishing skill, Dark Dance. Dark Dance, when activated, user enters stealth and attack speed increases by 20%, and movement speed increases by 30%. User leaves stealth if attacked or attacking. Duration, 15 seconds cooldown, 10 minutes, Absolute Shadow, Dagger, Subhand, Epic Rank, Level 100, Level 150 equipment requirement, Strength 2100 attributes adjust according to user's level. Attack power plus 5725, Level 100, Strength plus 385, agility plus 355, endurance plus 324, attack speed plus 16. Attacks carry the power of shadows. During attacks, armor penetration increased by 20%, 25% chance to cause 300% damage, 15% chance to trigger phantom strike, creating an impact equivalent to 120% of user's strength to a 3 by 15 yard area. When equipped, main attribute increased by 10%, secondary attributes increased by 7%, reaction speed increased by 10%, all of weapon skills effects increased by 10%, completion rate with all weapon skills increased by 2%, ignore levels plus 10. Additional passive skill Frenzied Shadow, every attack accumulates 1 point of shadow energy, independent from main absolute shadow. When 30 points of shadow energy have been accumulated, all shadow energy will automatically release, increasing user's attack speed by 30% for 3 seconds. Magic Light Pendant, Necklace, Fragmented Legendary Rank, Equipment Requirement, Intelligence 2000, Vitality 2100. Attributes adjust according to user's level. When equipped, all attributes increased by 35%, obtain Magic Light Body, increasing physique and mana affinity by 30%. Additional passive skill 1 Mana Draw, draws mana from the environment to recover user's mana. User regenerates 1% of their maximum mana every 5 seconds. Additional passive skill 2 Mana Heart, all spell effects increased by 30%. All casting time reduced by 25%. All spell completion rates increased by 5%. Additional active skill Mana Recharge, forcefully elevates all spell effects by 1 tier, to a maximum of tier 5, for 12 seconds. Cooldown, 3 hours, Dark Demon Set Forging Design, Dark Gold Rank, Set Level, Level 110, Level 125 6-piece set, Dark Demon Gauntlets, Dark Demon Breastplate, Dark Demon Helmet, Dark Demon Leg Guards, Dark Demon Boots, Dark Demon Braces. Class restriction. Plate Armor Classes Set Effect 4-piece effect, increases main attribute by 10% and all skill completion rates by 3%. 6-piece effect, increases physique by 20%. Upgrades physical armor to magic armor. When they saw the several items details, both Zero Wings members and the Hell Legion were stupefied. Aren't this inferior legendary treasure chests items a little too awesome? They're more than awesome. If an assassin equipped those daggers, they could reach for the heavens. Not only would their attack power be off the charts, but they could kill other players undetected. Those daggers are impressive, but they're garbage compared to the necklace for magical classes. I bet I could even challenge my tier 4 promotion quest as soon as I meet the level requirement with that necklace. That dark gold set equipment is just as incredible. The 6-piece set effect actually converts the set's defensive rank into magic armor. Opponents would have a hard time dealing damage to a player in that set. If an entire team could wear the Dark Demon set, they'd become an unstoppable army. Every member of the Hell Legion drooled when they saw the items. They had never dreamed that Zero Wing would gain such astounding items. Not only had Shifeng secured a fragmented legendary item, but he had also obtained a top-tier epic weapon set and dark gold set equipment forging design. These items were likely as valuable as the Demon God's Legacy. Hell Rush was particularly jealous, especially when he saw the Dark Demon set. It was godly equipment for plate armor classes. For a moment, he even forgot about the Demon God's Legacy. Magic armor was closest to rivaling divine armor. Not only did it reduce the damage from non-piercing attacks of the same tier by 30%, but it also reduced magic damage by a significant margin. It even doubled the damage reduction from attacks of a lower tier. To put it simply, every plate armor class dreamed of obtaining such equipment. If he could arm the Hell Legion's plate armor members with Dark Demon sets, they'd become an unstoppable force on the battlefield. Although the Demon God's Legacy was amazing, it wouldn't be as visibly effective at this stage of the game. Its effects would only become more apparent once players had reached higher levels and tiers. The Dark Demon set, on the other hand, could offer immediate results the moment players equipped it. After seeing these items, Hell Rush was certain that Shifeng hadn't suffered from this transaction. Shifeng might have lost an opportunity to gain a legacy, but with these items, he could boost the strength of Zero Wing's main force. They'd be particularly helpful when Zero Wing raided super large-scale team dungeons. You're too impulsive, Guild leader. You shouldn't have shared that information. Now, it won't be long before the various superpowers find out about those items. Some of them will try to take them from us, especially aiming for that magic light pendant. I'm afraid that the various superpowers magical class experts will do everything in their power to get their hands on it, Aqua Rose scolded. She had felt a little exasperated when Chiffon had shared the weapons and equipment's details with the Hell Legion's members. She realized that Chiffon wanted to reassure that Zero Wing hadn't suffered, but exposing a fragmented legendary item like the magic light pendant was unwise. It won't hurt anything if they know. Besides, hostile powers will assume that we've gained something powerful even if we didn't say anything. I just opened an inferior legendary treasure chest, after all. Rather than let them guess blindly and target us in secret, they might as well know everything. That way, we can reduce the risks, Chiffon said, chuckling. All right, it's about time for us to head back. Hiding the details of his harvest wouldn't have been an issue if the Hell Legion hadn't watched him open the inferior legendary treasure chest, but they had seen everything. Hiding his harvest was impossible. He'd much rather reveal the items and use them to elevate Zero Wing's fame than encourage the various superpowers to hunt the guild in the dark to find out what he had obtained. Top-tier weapons and equipment were always a hot topic among players. As the public learned about these items, they'd come to know about Zero Wing. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He had another purpose for revealing these items to the Hell Legion. He needed to conceal the crystal inside his bag. That crystal alone was worth more than the other items combined. Even high-tiered NPCs would try to take the crystal from him if they found out about it. He wouldn't even be surprised if an NPC attacked within an NPC city. This crystal was actually a god's heart, something even more precious than legendary items. The small crystal was enough to cause an uproar across all of God's domain. Chiffon didn't even dare to appraise the crystal at the moment, much less take it out of his bag. On the off chance that the crystal caused a commotion, he'd die from regret. With that said, Chiffon retrieved a return scroll and teleported back to the Starlight Fortress. He had lingered in the Star Tomb for long enough. Chapter 2497, Changes to the Starlight Fortress. Star Valley, Starlight Fortress. Chapter 2497, Changes to the Starlight Fortress. Star Valley, Starlight Fortress. As Chiffon and the others returned to the Starlight Fortress, they were surprised by the sight that greeted them. Players now crowded the previously unpopular Starlight Fortress, and some hadn't even reached level 100 yet. These players hawked their wares from the fortress's streets, selling all kinds of resistance potions and equipment. Some of them even sold level 100+ secret silver weapons and equipment. Such prosperity made it hard to imagine that the Starlight Fortress was a small fortress that had only opened less than a week ago. It looked more like a medium fortress that had been open to the public for several months. Why are so many players here? Thunder Beast was stunned and confused as he glanced at the crowded streets. He knew that very few players, other than Divine Tribe and his team, had been in the fortress before they had left on their expedition. The Starlight Fortress's entrance fee and general expenditures were exorbitant, after all. Remaining in the fortress for one extra day alone cost players another magic crystal. Not even experts like him could tolerate such a high price, not to mention normal players. With how Chiffon ran the fortress, Thunder Beast thought he would be fortunate to earn enough to sustain the fortress's daily operations. But contrary to his expectation, the Starlight Fortress practically overflowed with wealth, most of which came in the form of magic crystals. This fortress was almost more profitable than a Grade 3 or Vane. The situation even astonished Hell Rush. Even if the Demon God's Shrine has attracted quite a few players to Star Valley, the Starlight Fortress shouldn't have developed so quickly. What exactly happened here? Hell Rush watched the players wander the fortress's streets in confusion. He had expected the Starlight Fortress to become a popular location in Star Valley. Not many on the Western continent could resist the temptation of a demon god's legacy, and if they wanted to obtain it, they had to spend some time in the area. There was no denying that the Starlight Fortress was the best resting spot in Star Valley. The cost of living in the fortress might be incredibly high, but compared to a demon god's legacy, the cost was practically negligible. However, Less than half an hour had passed since the system announcement. How had so many players gathered in the fortress in less than 30 minutes? Commander, I think the mana here has changed. Since we've arrived, my mana affinity has increased, a Tier 3 elementalist informed Hell Rush. I can even sense a significant amount of the 3 supreme elements in the fortress's ambient mana, the 3 supreme elements. Doesn't that mean that this environment can rival that of ancient times? Hell Rush couldn't help his growing excitement. Ordinary players wouldn't have a clue about the environment of ancient times or its effect on players, but as the Hell Legion's commander, he understood much about God's domain. If the Starlight Fortress's environment resembled that of ancient times, the players resting in the fortress would have a much easier time unlocking their mana body's potential. Every player's mana body consisted of all 7 elements, and within an environment that lacked the 3 supreme elements, unlocking one's mana body was excruciatingly difficult. What did you do, guild leader? There are so many players here now. Our daily income should be far more than 200,000 magic crystals. Aqua Rose asked Chiffon when she saw the crowded streets. With so many magic crystals, we won't have to worry about producing the Dark Demon set. Not only did the Dark Demon set's production require a lot of rare materials, but it also required a ridiculous number of magic crystals. Forging a single set required 10,000 magic crystals, and the other rare materials could only be purchased with magic crystals. Overall, crafting each Dark Demon set would cost at least 20,000 magic crystals. Not even some ordinary powers could afford such an insane production cost. Zero Wing had already spent almost all of its magic crystals on materials from Divine Tribe and during the Starlight Fortress's capture. With how few they had left, developing the Starlight Fortress would prove challenging, not to mention crafting the Dark Demon set. The Starlight Fortress operated like a giant machine that relentlessly devoured magic crystals. Just keeping the fortress's magic array running was a huge expenditure, to say nothing of the summoning tower and fortress prison. Overall, the Starlight Fortress cost a minimum of 30,000 magic crystals per day. Zero Wing had already been forced to borrow magic crystals from Divine Tribe to sustain the fortress. However, now that the Starlight Fortress's player population had exceeded 200,000, the fortress earned a minimum of 200,000 magic crystals per day. Even after deducting the fortress's various expenditures, Zero Wing would earn more than 100,000 magic crystals in daily profit. Over 100,000 magic crystals of pure profit. Zero Wing wasn't even capable of earning so many magic crystals per day, even with Stone Forest City, Zero Wing City, and the guild's several ore veins. I haven't done anything. Players are just becoming more perceptive, Chiffon said, chuckling at Aqua Rose's excitement. The Starlight Fortress was an ancient fortress. Once it opened to the public, it would gradually attract the 3 supreme elements from its surroundings to recreate its original environment. However, this was a very long and arduous process. It would still take some time before the fortress had an environment that could rival that of ancient times. Even so, the feature was incredibly precious to God's Domain's players. The environment wouldn't only be useful to players trying to unlock their mana body's potential. It would also help as players tried to climb through the tiers. As players aimed for higher tiers, they had to have a basic understanding and control of the 7 elements. Without this control and knowledge, they'd always be weaker than others of the same tier. As for the matter of the Dark Demon set, he had been nursing a headache over the issue, as well. Forging a few sets might not be much of an issue, but if he wanted to mass-produce the Dark Demon set, he'd need enough magic crystals to give the various superpowers heart attacks. Fortunately, the Starlight Fortress had been developing wonderfully while he'd been gone. Without this progress, he would have only been able to stare at the forging design. While he had solved the problem of materials, however, he still needed sufficient manpower. He couldn't do it all by himself. He would need at least 2 other advanced master forgers to ensure a reliable success rate when Hapismiley the Dark Demon set. The cost of failure would even be enough to put a first-rate guild in the red. Suddenly, a party of level 106 plus peak experts, led by a beautiful woman, approached Chiffon. The graceful woman was none other than Phythalia, the Divine Hymn Legion's commander. Surprisingly, Phythalia had lost a level, falling to level 106, and a faint, deathly aura surrounded her, signifying that she was currently in a weakened state. The revelation shocked Shifeng and the others. "I've finally found you, Guild Leader Black Flame," Phythalia said with a somber expression. "Has something happened?" Shifeng replied with a question. Communication between those within the Star Tomb and those outside of it was severed. To contact players on the other side, one would have to do so through offline means. However, Shifeng hadn't been worried with Divine Tribe's forces and the Silver Divine Dragon protecting the Starlight Fortress, and as such, he hadn't left any of his guild's experts behind in the fortress. Mythology's people arrived. Not only have they demanded that Divine Tribe hand over the temporary residents, but they've also demanded that Zero Wing surrender 51% of the Starlight Fortress's shares, Phythalia said. "What about your level?" It didn't surprise Shifeng that a super guild like Mythology had set its sights on the Starlight Fortress, but he was surprised to see that Phythalia had lost a level. "It's nothing. I fought Mythology's people and lost," Phythalia explained. "That's what I want to talk to you about. I don't know what kind of power Mythology's members have obtained, but they can completely conceal their auras. Even when they fought inside the fortress, the Divine Dragon needed some time to sense them. If Mythology causes more chaos in the fortress, I'm afraid that we won't be able to contain it, even you weren't a match for them." Hell Rush was stunned to hear about the recent events. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Hell Rush knew how strong Phythalia was. She was definitely as strong as he was. Even Mythology's old monsters should have a difficult time defeating her, and her guards followed her everywhere. Logically, no one should be powerful enough to kill her. They have a way to conceal their auras. Shifeng fell into deep thought for a moment. He was aware of plenty of methods to conceal one's aura in God's domain, but none of those methods could hide one from a divine dragon, even for a short time. Mythology's people also asked me to relay a message. They've said that they will show up once more after the demon god's shrine has activated and hope that Zero Wing will have considered their proposal carefully. If Zero Wing refuses to cooperate, it will have to bear the consequences. Phythalia had a huge headache over the situation. The group of players Mythology had sent to the fortress was incredibly powerful, and they could completely hide their auras. If a fight broke out between them, the Starlight Fortress would pay the price. Chapter 2498, God's Heart. Chapter 2498, God's Heart. As Phythalia finished speaking, silence fell. Hell Rush frowned at hearing the news. Mythology is being too arrogant. Do they think Netherworld Empire is powerless? Thunder Beast, who stood nearly 3 meters tall, bellowed in rage. This was infuriating. Not only had Mythology extorted Zero Wing with its declaration, but it also ignored Netherworld Empire. The public had long since learned of Netherworld Empire's partnership with the Starlight Fortress. Every superpower on the Western continent knew of it. Naturally, there was no way a super guild like Mythology hadn't heard. And yet, Mythology demanded 51% of the Starlight Fortress's shares. Not even Netherworld Empire had any of the fortress's shares. By demanding 51% of the fortress, Mythology had essentially declared that it was more powerful and important than Netherworld Empire. Phythalia, do you know who's leading the team from Mythology? Hell Rush asked in a frosty tone. It seems it's been so long since our last battle that Mythology's people have forgotten about the Hell Legion. The temperature around the group dropped as Hell Rush spoke. The ambient mana began to freeze as if reacting to his emotions. Obviously, Hell Rush's mana control was already considerable. Commander Rush, you mustn't act rashly. These people belong to a newly formed team from Mythology. Their leader is a young, silver-haired man. He only looks to be around 22 or 23, and he has already replaced Trembling Hand as the first vice-commander of Mythology's strongest trump card legion. All of his teammates are roughly the same age, but they're all incredibly strong. Not even our team's strongest assassin is as fast as they are. They move like ghosts. When they had appeared behind me, I hadn't noticed their presence at all, Phythalia elaborated when she realized that Hell Rush intended to pick a fight with these Mythology members. Their team will be especially difficult to take down in the fields. She understood Hell Rush's rage, but this team had a little over a dozen players, and they could all vanish without a trace. If the Hell Legion fought these players in the Starlight Fortress, they might be fine, but the Legion would only be running towards its death if it tried to take them on in the fields. With the complex terrain in the fields, not being able to sense one's opponent would leave one blind. Even if Hell Rush and the others were strong, those mythology members were exceptionally fast. Pinning down just one of those players would require 5 or 6 peak experts at the very least. And there were over a dozen of those experts. When these players had attacked the dozens of peak experts under her command, she hadn't been able to stop them. These mythology members targeted a single player before fleeing once they killed their mark. It was easy to imagine how formidable they'd be out in the fields. His replaced Trembling Hand? How is that possible? Thunder Beast was astonished. Trembling Hand had been known as a genius ever since he had joined the virtual gaming world. He had fought in virtual games for over a dozen years now and had long since reached the domain realm. He had achieved just as much in the domain realm as Hell Rush, and the man was still in his 30s. He was currently at his prime, and he still had plenty of room for improvement. The various superpowers upper echelons all believed that Trembling Hand was the most likely player to become the commander of mythology's strongest trump card legion, and yet, he had lost his position as first vice commander to a youth. Even Hell Rush wore a grim expression after hearing the news. It's no wonder why they dared to spout such nonsense. It seems they're not all talk after all. Hell Rush thought, his eyes narrowing as he thought about how to deal with these people. If what Phythalia said was true, this would be a major problem. There were only a few members of the Hell Legion who could go up against Trembling Hand. None of the rest of the Legion's members would last very long against him. Meanwhile, the youth Phythalia mentioned could evade detection and was even stronger than Trembling Hand. If that were true, none of the Hell Legion's members would last more than a handful of moves against this silver-haired youth. Unless the target had an invulnerability skill or spell, not even Hell Rush could help before the youth executed 3 or 4 moves. Meanwhile, if this youth wanted to escape, they'd need at least 20 peak experts to stop him, and that was assuming that these experts didn't lose sight of the young man. Commander Phythalia, do you have a record of their entry and exit from the fortress? Shifeng asked. No. They seemed to have just appeared, and based on their behavior, they had no issue slipping past the gate security. Not even the Tier 3 NPCs noticed them, Phythalia said, shaking her head. Divine Tribe had stationed some of its Tier 3 personal guards to manage the Starlight Fortress's front gate, but when she had checked the NPC's asterisk records, there was no mention of the players from mythology. It was as if these people had appeared out of thin air. Stopping these players at the fortress's gate wasn't even possible. This is interesting, Shifeng said, smiling. Interesting? Phythalia could not help but roll her eyes. For a moment, she wondered if Shifeng understood the severity of this situation. With the ability to enter and leave the Starlight Fortress freely, no one could stop these players from causing chaos within the Starlight Fortress. The Starlight Fortress had just taken off. If chaos ensued inside, it would spell tragedy for the fortress's development. Nobody wanted to remain in an unsafe location, especially when important resource transactions were involved. Of course. Leave the rest to Zero Wing, although I will have to continue to trouble you regarding the fortress's daily security, Commander Phythalia, Shifeng said as he nodded confidently. If this had happened before he had obtained a god's heart, these ghost-like experts would have been a huge headache for him. Without the ability to instant kill these players, they could disappear to any random comer of the fortress, and that would be the end of the story. He would have no choice but to let these people leave. However, the situation had changed. He now had a god's heart, a source of eternal energy that rivaled the value of divine artifacts. Not only could one use this god's heart as a power core, but one could also release the eternal energy it contained and use it to learn new concepts. It was the best item when trying to comprehend new information. Eternal energy was an even more powerful energy than mana. Only the gods could use and gather the energy, and even they struggled to collect it. Since the gods had long since removed themselves from the world, finding eternal energy had become incredibly difficult in God's domain, even for Tier 5 NPCs, who stood at the apex of this world. A single, small drop of concentrated eternal energy would be enough to incite an all-out brawl between Tier 5 NPCs and Tier 6 God-ranked players. Meanwhile, the God's Heart in Shifeng's bag was a condensed form of eternal energy, which not even an empire's entire wealth could buy. Initially, Shifeng had wanted to learn the rest of the memory crystal's content once he had returned to the Eastern continent and found an ideal venue for studying the information. Tier 3 players' foundations were their mana bodies, and only by unlocking his epic mana body's potential could he display his full strength. He'd then be able to explore the maps that contained Solomon's sword's remaining fragments. Hence, he needed a location that could help him gain the most benefit from the Eliadi's memory crystal. However, now that he had a God's Heart, he wouldn't have to go to such great lengths to learn the crystal's contents. Once he found enough privacy to take the God's Heart from his bag without exposing it to others, he could create his own venue, the best in God's domain. Fortunately, the Fortress Lord's mansion was the perfect location. Shifeng then parted ways with Phythalia and the others, making his way to the mansion. Phythalia was dumbfounded as she watched Shifeng and Zero Wing's members walk away. She couldn't fathom what was going through the swordsman's mind. At such a crucial moment, Shifeng had reacted similarly to Hell Rush, intent on taking his anger out on these mythology players. "What should we do now, Commander?" the Tier 3 shield warrior beside Phythalia asked. "The ruckus mythology caused has already scared plenty of merchant players away. If mythology causes another scene, I'm afraid everyone in the fortress will panic. Controlling the situation won't be easy." Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU forget it. I don't care anymore. Let mythology's people cause a scene if they want. Once Zero Wing's people realize how severe the situation is, we should be able to curb mythology's experts as long as our 3 guilds work together, Phythalia said as she massaged her forehead. She had already learned that trying to dissuade Shifeng from doing anything foolish was a waste of time. She might as well let him try whatever he had planned. Once he failed, he'd approach Divine Tribe to work on a solution together. There's no need for such pessimism, Commander Phythalia. Who knows? Guild leader Black Flame might actually be able to show these mythology members who's boss. Zero Wing's strength is the real deal. Even if Zero Wing's players can't stop mythology's experts completely, they should be able to give them a run for their money, Hell Rush said, attempting to console Phythalia. Hell Rush didn't think Zero Wing had enough power to take out this team from mythology by itself either, but with experts like Fire Dance and her comrades, they should be able to give mythology a huge headache for their trouble. Now, it was just a matter of waiting to see who lasted longer. While Phythalia and Hell Rush conversed, Shifeng had reached the Fortress Lord's mansion's core room. He used the Fortress Lord's token to activate the room's defensive magic array before carefully retrieving the crystal that emitted a faint trace of divine might from his bag. Chapter 2499, Epic Mana Body Unlocked. Chapter 2499, Epic Mana Body Unlocked. As Shifeng pulled the God's Heart from his bag, faint mana pulsed throughout the dark and quiet core room. It wasn't a lot of mana, but it had enough power that space within the room trembled. When the pulse encountered the room's magic barrier, it, too, began to tremble, almost failing to block the mana. Sure enough, a God's Heart is intensely powerful. I only took it out of my bag, and it nearly felled the room's magic barrier. Shifeng stared at the magic barrier around the room, astonished. Fortunately, he was within an ancient fortress's core room. This magic barrier was far stronger than ordinary versions. Even mythic monsters would have an extremely hard time trying to destroy it. Had he retrieved the God's Heart in any other location within the Starlight Fortress, the barrier wouldn't have been able to contain the mana pulse. The energy would have escaped and caught the attention of everyone within the fortress. However, this pulse of mana had also substantially increased the mana density in the room. A gentle layer of mist now filled the core room. If players trained here, they'd likely be able to practice bronze combat techniques without rest. They could train to their heart's content. Following which, Shifeng activated omniscient eyes to appraise the God's Heart. Augustus's damaged heart, inferior divine artifact rank material. This is the barbarian god Augustus's heart and crystallization of eternal energy. When Augustus had fallen, the demon god, Atlock, had secured his heart and repeatedly modified it. Once one has activated the magic array engraved on the heart, the user will be exposed to dense eternal energy for 12 hours. The magic array will require 3 months to recover after each activation. Restoring the magic array's eternal energy is possible by sacrificing one god crystal. Amazing! Atlock had transformed a consumable god's heart into a tool that can supply endless eternal energy. When Shifeng read Augustus's heart's description, he was shocked. Gods' hearts were typically one-time use consumables. When players released the eternal energy contained within, the god's heart would release all of its energy. Eventually, the god's heart would run out of eternal energy and fade from existence. Only a few Tier 5 NPCs could control the release of eternal energy from a god's heart, allowing them to use the item multiple times. Even so, they couldn't change the fact that the god's heart would vanish when it ran out of eternal energy. And yet, Atlock had successfully modified Augustus's heart, transforming it into a tool that could offer endless eternal energy. Shifeng had certainly hit the jackpot this time. It was no wonder why Atlock was so determined to kill him, even using a demon god's legacy as bait. Although one could only use the modified Augustus's heart for 12 short hours, it was more than enough time for players. The only major flaw was the 3-month cooldown. Even so, Augustus's heart was unbelievably amazing. Players would encounter countless roadblocks on their road to higher tiers in God's domain, and it wasn't possible to overcome all of these roadblocks at once. Players would have to face them, one after another. The Tier 3 mana body and Tier 4 mana control were 2 examples. However, Shifeng could overcome them all with Augustus's heart. Moreover, he could use a god crystal to circumvent the cooldown. He was immensely satisfied with his latest endeavor. If word of Augustus's heart spread, all of God's domain would go into a frenzy, including both players and NPCs. Shifeng took a moment to suppress his excitement and began to activate the magic array within Augustus's heart. He was prepared to accept the heavenly blue saint's mana body legacy. However, Shifeng frowned when he examined the array. This magic array was more complex than any he had encountered before. Manipulating it would be intensely challenging, even now that he had become an intermediate master magician. A basic master magician would have no chance of activating this magic array. Sure enough, the main god system won't just hand players so much power. Shifeng gave the magic array a bitter smile. He had wanted to use the god crystals he had on hand to help Kola and the rest unlock their mana body's full potential once he had done so himself. The sooner they did so, the more they would benefit in the future. However, it seemed that wouldn't be possible. Activating Augustus's heart's magic array would be absolutely impossible unless one had become an intermediate master magician. His dream of forming an army of powerful experts had just shattered. Becoming a master magician in God's domain was far easier than becoming a master forger, yet very few players were capable of accomplishing the feat naturally. Reaching every subsequent rank after becoming a basic master magician was incredibly difficult, even more so than rising through the ranks after becoming a master forger. In all of Zero Wing, only Aqua Rose and Violet Cloud had high chances of becoming basic master magicians. Everyone else would still have a long road ahead of them, and 2 players simply weren't enough to form an army. Shaking his head, Shifeng banished his thoughts and began to focus on learning and decoding the magic array. 10 minutes. 20 minutes. 40 minutes. As he completed the final strand of Mana's trajectory, Augustus's heart lit with a colorful glow. Streams of purple mist then flowed from the item and into Shifeng. Suddenly, Shifeng felt incredibly comfortable, and his mind was unprecedentedly clear. The eternal energy proved many times more effective than the densest mana. Wasting no time, Shifeng retrieved the memory crystal Eliade had given him and started to study her legacy on the mana body. The goddess's mana body technique was more complex than her mana technique legacy. Not only did it contain information on mana and the methods to control it, but it also contained concise information on the structure of mana bodies. According to Eliade's research, the higher a mana body's rank was, the more complex it would be. Subsequently, one would need a more complicated mana control method to use their mana body. An epic mana body was on par with a super large-scale magic array consisting of several hundred smaller arrays. There were many ways to control this super large-scale magic array, but only one would give a player full control over the entire array. They'd have to construct a simple magic array that would allow the user to control multiple core arrays. The more core magic arrays this simple array could control, the more power the super large-scale magic array could exhibit. If Shifeng had tried to process all of the information within the memory crystal before he had obtained Augustus's heart, none even the densest mana would save him from the headache. Fortunately, the eternal energy around him was amazingly beneficial. Not only did it boost his comprehension and memory, but it also allowed him to try to create the simple magic array that was necessary for controlling the flow of mana within his mana body. For a time, Shifeng radiated stronger and weaker mana at random intervals. At his strongest, he radiated dense enough mana to rival that within Stone Forest City, and at his weakest, he radiated roughly the same density as the mana found in ordinary NPC cities. During the process, Shifeng rapidly unlocked more of his mana body's potential. 40%, 55%, 70%. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. However, as Shifeng continued to unlock his epic mana body, his progress slowed. By the time the memory crystal's duration ended, Shifeng had only reached 82% of his potential. He was still far from 100%. In the 9 hours since he had activated Augustus's heart, he had only unlocked 91% of his mana body's potential. Just as the 12 hours were almost up, an intense wave of mana exploded from Shifeng's body, forming a mist in the core room. The mist was light, easy to miss if one weren't paying attention, but it was undeniable that Shifeng exuded mana that was so dense it condensed into its liquid form. Finally, success! Shifeng's eyes flew open, flashing with excitement as he observed the mana that automatically flowed throughout his mana body. Chapter 2500, Frightening Improvement. Chapter 2500, Frightening Improvement. In God's domain, Tier 3 NPCs were considered powerhouses that could protect NPC cities. However, players only became powerhouses once they had unlocked their mana body's full potential. Only with a fully unlocked mana body could players enter and leave certain locations freely. If they tried to do so without unlocking their mana body, only death would await them. The Star Tomb regional dungeon's entry requirements were actually quite low. Even Tier 3 players that hadn't fully unlocked their mana bodies could explore the area, albeit barely. In comparison, certain unique areas were full of incredibly corrosive energy, and Tier 3 players wouldn't last more than 5 minutes in these areas without unlocking their mana body's full potential. Unlocking their mana bodies was the only way players could protect themselves against the corrosive energy. This was why players were only considered powerhouses once they had fully unlocked their mana bodies. Most importantly, the skills and spells players used would be far stronger once they had unlocked their mana bodies than those who hadn't. So, this is an epic mana body? Astonishment colored Shifeng's features as he sensed the dense mana radiating from his body. He had never dreamed that an epic mana body would be this powerful. Normally, a mana body relied on its own mana to function, but his mana body could attract ambient mana and use it to strengthen and nourish itself. His epic mana body had also coated his body with a thin barrier of mana. The barrier was easy to miss if one weren't paying close attention. It almost felt like a skin-tight suit. It trapped a significant portion of the mana radiating from him, drastically reducing the amount of mana wasted. Not only did this mana barrier improve his recovery, but it also ensured that the mana around him was far denser than normal. The addition of this mana barrier alone doubled or tripled his survivability in the fields, especially in low mana environments. When he fought in such harsh environments, he wouldn't have to worry about losing a significant portion of his combat power. Shifeng tried to manipulate his mana body, guiding the mana around him into his hands. He instantly felt like a black hole as the ambient mana gathered around him. In the blink of an eye, a faint layer of mana mist formed on the surface of his palms. Shifeng's fist then shot out as he punched the empty air. Pang! Space exploded around his fist as if the punch had created a vacuum. Space around him trembled at the power of the strike, and the core room's magic barrier shuddered. With this power, I can now likely solo a mythic monster of the same level, even without my berserk skills. Shifeng gasped when he saw the results of his punch. He had merely executed a normal punch, and he didn't even have his weapons equipped. The difference between a player's attack power with a weapon and without one in God's domain was massive. With Killing Ray equipped, his prior punches had only been able to break the sound barrier. He had only been able to make space tremble and create spatial tears when he used the secret technique, Lightning Flash. Yet now, without any techniques or weapons, he could exhibit power on par with when he wielded Killing Ray. An epic mana body provided horrific power. In his opinion, although mana bodies massively boosted players' strength, they didn't provide this much power. The benefits of unlocking his mana body thus far could already rival that of a fragmented legendary weapon. Moreover, he had only unlocked 100% of his mana body's potential. If he could push beyond that, his strength would rise to a whole new level. After 100%, every additional percent would provide tremendous power. As far as Shifeng knew, players had only reached 120% of their mana body's potential in the past. It was easy to imagine how frighteningly powerful 120% of an epic mana body's potential would be. Even transcending tears would be possible. Elated, Shifeng started to practice Eliadai's mana technique. He had now unlocked 100% of his mana body's potential. Going beyond that would take some time, and it would be as difficult as creating a master magic array for an apprentice magician. Fortunately, unlocking more than 100% of his epic mana body wasn't the only way to transcend tears. He could also rely on the help of a mana technique. He had experienced Eliadai's Holy Annihilation personally, and despite suppressing herself to Tier 3, the Heavenly Blue Saint's attack could instant kill or heavily injure Tier 4 beings. If Shifeng could master Eliadai's Holy Annihilation, the mana technique would prove significantly helpful. He hadn't been able to learn the technique earlier since he hadn't unlocked his mana body fully yet, but now that he had, he could truly practice the Holy Annihilation. Mana techniques weren't like combat techniques. Combat techniques consumed the user's stamina and concentration, but mana techniques, on the other hand, only consumed concentration. Players generally avoided using combat techniques in harsh environments, trying to conserve their stamina due to the heavy burden the environment placed on them. However, with a few exceptions, these harsh environments did not affect players' concentration consumption. Hence, God's Domain's experts that had grasped mana techniques, whether self-taught or learned from the system, had an easier time exploring the world, especially the maps with harsh environments. Now that Shifeng had achieved his goals in visiting the Western continent, he needed to search for Solomon's Sword's remaining fragments to maintain his advantages and pave a smoother path for Aqua Rose and his other comrades as they aimed for Tier 4. If he put the task off, it would only be a matter of time before the various superpowers, with how fast they were developing, would overpower Zero Wing. If he could learn Eliadai's mana technique now, not only would he have a much better chance of securing the fragments of Solomon's Sword, but he could also teach the technique to Aqua Rose and the others. As Shifeng tried to mimic the way Eliadai had executed the first sword, Light Shadow, the more the Heavenly Blue Saint amazed him. Eliadai's mana technique even seemed slightly stronger than the mana techniques the demon god, Atlok, had used. The first sword, Light Shadow, used all 7 elements, and executing the strike proved even more difficult than Lightning Flash, a bronze combat technique. Shifeng needed to channel and gather his mana for several seconds before he could attempt to execute Light Shadow. Atlok had also needed some preparation time before executing his mana technique. The demon god had spent several seconds preparing the black hole, the last attack he had used against Shifeng. Even though Atlok had executed the mana technique through his phantom, that phantom had still been at the Tier 5 standard. The goddess, on the other hand, had executed Light Shadow, Holy Devour, and Holy Annihilation without any preparation time whatsoever. On the contrary, it has seemed as if she had been able to pause her technique, releasing her attack when she needed to in a systematic manner. When Shifeng thought about that fight, he realized the intervals between each of her attacks had been exactly the same. Even at the Tier 3 standard, Eliadai had accomplished the feat as Shifeng continued to practice Light Shadow. However, he was able to reduce the time he needed before executing the technique. Initially, He spent nearly 8 minutes preparing his strike, but now, he could do so after around 5 minutes. The more Shifeng practiced, the more he understood about mana control. 2 hours. 6 hours. 12 hours. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. While Shifeng was immersed in his training, he received a call request from Phythalia. Guild leader Black Flame, Mythology's people are back. They are all gathered in the Starlight Bar, and I think they've found a way to deal with your divine dragon. More of them have arrived, as well. Now, there are more than 30 players in their group, Phythalia reported with a somber expression. Dealing with the dozen-plus experts had already been a struggle, but now, more than double had shown up in the Starlight Fortress. Even if Zero Wing, Divine Tribe, and Hell Legion gathered all of their peak experts in the fortress, suppressing these mythology players would still prove difficult. They've returned so soon? Shifeng muttered in surprise. However, when he glanced at the time, he realized that he had been training for over half a day. It had felt like time had passed even more quickly than when he had worked to unlock his mana body. He then sheathed his swords and grinned. All right, I'll be right there. With that, Shifeng disconnected the call and left the core room. Chapter 2501, Mythology arrives Starlight Fortress, Starlight Bar. Chapter 2501, Mythology arrives Starlight Fortress, Starlight Bar. The Starlight Bar was usually the most popular bar in the Starlight Fortress, but right now, the bar, which was half the size of a football field, was silent as everyone stared at the group of players in black, drinking quietly in the middle of the establishment. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. The rest of the crowd wasn't simply reacting in such a way because the black-clad players had appeared like a group of magicians. Rather, their reactions were due to the fact that every one of those players wore Mythology's guild emblem. So, they're the rumored experts from Mythology? Amazing. I see them, yet I can't sense their presence. How did they do it? It seems that even Mythology can't help but get involved now that the demon god's shrine had appeared. Once everyone had gotten over their shock at seeing these players, they quietly chatted amongst themselves. Some players were afraid, while others were excited. Mythology was one of the 5 great super guilds in the virtual gaming world. Every player on the Western continent was familiar with its reputation. News of Mythology's black-clad players causing chaos had already spread throughout the fortress. Not only had these players avoided the Divine Dragon's wrath, but they had also managed to slay quite a few of Divine Tribe's experts. Even Phythalia, the commander of one of Divine Tribe's trump card legions, had lost her life in battle. In response, Divine Tribe had dispatched even more experts to patrol the Starlight Fortress's streets. It had even sent plenty of Tier 3 personal guards to join the patrols. However, not only had Mythology's experts snuck into the city again, but more of them had come, as well. Now, they even congregated in the Starlight Bar, the fortress's most popular bar, drinking like normal customers. They treated the Starlight Fortress like they would their own hometown. Mythology is amazing, boss. They're completely disregarding the fortress's divine dragon. It seems the Starlight Fortress will soon have a new owner, the ruthless man from the Stormheart Adventurer team admired as he watched the black-clad players from Mythology. When he had encountered the Starlight Fortress's divine dragon, he had only felt fear. Players had no chance against it in his opinion, yet these black-clad players acted as if the divine dragon didn't even exist, coming and going from the fortress as they wished. Mythology's foundations were simply frightening. Mythology certainly is stronger than the other superpowers. Aside from those players' ability to conceal their presence, their combat standards are impressive. They're all bona fide peak experts. Several of them are even stronger than I am. I don't even know how I would fight that silver-haired youth leading the group. I don't think he's even human, Crow said as he observed Mythology's members, a trace of fear flashing in his eyes. If they decide to cause a scene in the fortress, there will be a mess, and no one will be able to do anything about it. With the situation as it is, even Zero Wing, with all its advantages, will have to make concessions for them. Crow knew that the various superpowers were no match for the 5 great super guilds, but he had never imagined that the gap between them would be this massive. Mythology's black-clad players were at least level 107, but their auras were even powerful enough to make an expert like him feel uncomfortable. The weakest member of the group had basic attributes to rival a Grand Lord of the same level. Fighting just one of those players would pose a huge problem for him. If he had to face 2 or 3 simultaneously, there was a very high likelihood that he'd fall. To make matters worse, there were over 30 of these experts in the bar, and all of them could completely conceal their auras. This was just a nightmare. There was also the silver-haired leader to worry about. Although Crow could not sense the youth's aura, his instincts told him that if he came within 30 yards of the young man, his life would be forfeit. While the bar's patrons quietly watched Mythology's experts, the group in question acted as if none of the surrounding players existed at all, chatting with each other and utterly carefree. "Commander, the higher-ups are being really stubborn. They still want us to negotiate with Zero Wing as a show of respect for Netherworld Empire. Why should we have to show anyone any respect? We should just capture the Starlight Fortress. With the fortress, Mythology can claim the demon god's legacy once the demon god's shrine activates," a tall, slim woman carrying a war hammer and sturdy shield grumbled. As far as she was concerned, Netherworld Empire had only partnered with Zero Wing because it wasn't strong enough to take the fortress for itself, but Mythology was a different story. Capturing the Starlight Fortress wouldn't be difficult for her team, especially now that they had grown stronger. Not even taking out Netherworld Empire's Hell Legion would be an issue, let alone capturing the Starlight Fortress. They had no reason to fear the guild. "I concur. We'd be better off giving Zero Wing a beating and taking the Fortress Lord's mansion. We shouldn't need to go to the trouble of targeting Divine Tribe to get at the Eastern Guild. If we don't teach him a lesson, Black Flame will think the West is just like the Eastern Continent," a young assassin carrying 2 short swords added, nodding in agreement. Mythology's power was limited on the Eastern Continent, and thus, what it could accomplish there was limited, but in the West, squashing Zero Wing would be child's play. Not even the Divine Dragon's protection could save Zero Wing's players. Mythology's foundations on the Western Continent were just that far beyond what Zero Wing could imagine. Don't get careless. Netherworld Empire has its reasons for working with Zero Wing. Based on recent reports, Zero Wing already has 5 members with fully unlocked mana bodies. Those players are extraordinarily strong. If they show up, follow the backup plan. Activate your battle arrays and face them in 4-man cells. The rest of you will continue as we initially planned. If the Divine Dragon approaches, retreat immediately, the silver-haired team leader ordered, watching his impatient team members. "Rest assured, Commander. Aside from the dragon, these players are nothing. I don't know how those Zero Wing players unlocked their mana bodies' full potential so quickly, but so what?" the assassin youth loudly and fearlessly proclaimed. "If Zero Wing's members really do show up, I'll make sure none of them leave alive." The rest of Mythology's team nodded. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU fully unlocking one's mana body might substantially increase one's combat power, but their advanced battle array was no trivial matter. As long as they activated their battle arrays, they could combine the strength of 4 players. The player that received all this power would be even strong enough to take down a mythic monster of the same level, much less Tier 3 players. If Zero Wing's members dared to show their faces, their team could slap them down with ease. "Is that so? I'd like to test your claim, then." Suddenly, everyone in the bar heard a deep voice, and the speaker immediately caused an uproar. Every player in the Starlight Bar spun toward the speaker, assuming whoever had been so bold must be crazy. This player had just directly challenged Mythology's experts. They must be suicidal. 2 people, a man and a woman, walked into the bar. The woman was the beautiful, elegant Phythalia, while the man felt as dark as night. Chapter 2502, Silent Starlight Bar. Chapter 2502, Silent Starlight Bar. As Shafong and Phythalia entered the Starlight Bar, interrupting the black-clad Mythology members' conversation, an uproar broke out among the spectating patrons. "Crap! Isn't that beauty Phythalia, the commander of one of Divine Tribe's trump card legions? It seems they're going to start another fight. A fight. This'll be a war. I hadn't thought I'd get lucky enough to watch this unfold personally." Many of these players were experts with vast information networks. They were, more or less, aware of the struggle between the various superpowers over the Starlight Fortress. Now that mythology had taken the initiative to pick a fight with the Starlight Fortress, a war between the various superpowers was unavoidable. Although, none of them had expected it to begin so soon. Clashes between experts, particularly those from the various superpowers, were extremely rare learning opportunities in God's domain, especially for the players that got to watch the fights personally. They'd be able to learn far more than from watching a recording of the battle. This was precisely the reason that the various powers constantly tried to gain entry tickets to the various superpowers' Dark Arena. Unfortunately, without adequate connections, normal players didn't even qualify to enter the Dark Arena. However, compared to the battle unfolding right before their eyes, the Dark Arena's battles were nothing. The various superpowers participants in the Dark Arena never went all out, but this situation would be different. To secure the right to rule the Starlight Fortress, all parties involved would fight with everything they had. While the bar's spectating patrons became excited, Mythology's members turned to give Shafong cold looks. Every one of them was restless, eager to get the fight started. Sensing these black-clad players' hostility, Phythalia felt a headache brew. She had tried to convince Shafong to gather some manpower before confronting Mythology's members, but Shafong had headed for the Starlight Bar the moment he had heard about their arrival. Shafong was the only player that had a claim over the Fortress Lord's mansion. If anything happened to him, defending their hold on the fortress would become far more difficult. The various superpowers had already stationed plenty of experts in the Starlight Fortress. If the fortress suddenly lost its owner, they'd cause a huge commotion. Not even Divine Tribe's forces would be able to stop them. In the end, she had no choice but to follow Shafong to the Starlight Bar, contacting the players under her command to meet them there on the way. Shafong, however, had done the unexpected again and picked a fight with Mythology before the backup she had called could get there. They were currently facing over 30 peak experts. And these weren't any ordinary peak experts. Not only could they hide their auras, but they were all incredibly fast. If these peak experts decided to attack as one, the consequences would be dire. "You're quite daring, you bastard," the short-sword-wielding assassin youth said, sneering at Shafong. "Show me whether or not you have the strength to support that courage." Just before the assassin could step forward, however, the silver-haired youth beside him extended a hand, blocking his path. "Commander," the assassin asked, confused about why his leader had stopped him. But the silver-haired player hadn't offered an explanation. Rather, he smiled at Shafong. "So, your guild leader Blackflame," the silver-haired youth said, smiling. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Silver Ghost, the first vice-commander of Mythology's #1 trump card legion. Is he the player that foiled vice-guild leader Cold Shadow's plan? It's no wonder why he spoke so boldly earlier. He's really brave. He actually came here without any backup. Does he intend to offer a compromise?" After Silver Ghost's introduction, realization dawned on the rest of Mythology's members. Their goal was to seek out Shafong and negotiate. "Since Commander Phythalia has come with you, I'm sure she told you about my offer. What do you think about it, Guild Leader Black Flame?" Silver Ghost patiently asked, glancing at Phythalia before returning his gaze to Shafong. Silver Ghost had fought Phythalia personally, so he knew that she was a monster-level expert. She also had a party of peak expert bodyguards. Normally, she and her bodyguards shouldn't have any issue defeating a 100-man team of Tier 3 experts. Unfortunately, his team wasn't here for Phythalia. Even with her strength, she had no chance against 3 or 4 of his subordinates. She'd be doomed if over a dozen of his teammates attacked at once. The only real threat in the Starlight Fortress was Netherworld Empire's Hell Legion. Not only did the Hell Legion consist of 300 Tier 3 experts, but they were all extraordinarily strong, as well. However, if his team intended to cause chaos in this fortress, not even the Hell Legion was powerful enough to stop them. "I have no reason to consider it. Since Zero Wing is strong enough to capture the Starlight Fortress, it's strong enough to hold it. If you want to fight, bring it on," Shafong calmly stated, eyeing Silver Ghost. "How unfortunate." Silver Ghost could only sigh at Shafong's reply. Why are you still wasting your time with him, Commander? The assassin youth sneered. Let my group deal with him. If we don't teach him a lesson, he'll continue to assume that mythology is powerless against him. That's right. If we don't show him our strength, he'll likely assume that we left earlier because we were afraid of him. The rest of mythology's team nodded. Their previous visit to the Starlight Fortress had merely been a form of greeting. Now that Shifeng had rejected their goodwill, they had no reason to hold back. In fact, if they continued to act passively, Shifeng would treat their guild as a joke. All right. Your group can deal with him, but make it quick. Everyone else, pay attention to your surroundings. Retreat as soon as the divine dragon approaches, Silver Ghost said, granting the assassin youth permission to take action. Thank you, Commander. I'll make sure to end the fight quickly, the assassin youth replied with a hungry expression. He turned toward Shifeng and continued, You've been pretty arrogant, bastard. Let's see if you can back up those words. Suddenly, divine runes lit up all across the assassin's body and enveloped another 3 mythology members behind him. A powerful aura began to radiate from the assassin youth, growing stronger by the second. After just 3 seconds, his aura was so intense that a sense of dread overcame everyone in the bar. How is his aura so powerful? It's almost as intense as a Grand Lord ranked archaic species of the same level. The bar's patrons gaped at the young assassin. Is this a sample of mythology's foundations? The situation shocked the ruthless man from Stormheart. Although it wasn't possible to determine a player's strength based on their aura, that aura would at least hint at their strength. At this stage of the game, Tier 3 players still struggled to defeat great lords of the same level, and in Star Valley, players couldn't use their berserk skills. If a player had the strength of a Grand Lord ranked archaic species of the same level, they'd be able to move through Star Valley unhindered. With that kind of power, even killing Tier 3 MTS would be as easy as swatting a fly. They hadn't actually used their full strength earlier. Phythalia watched on with a grim expression. When she felt the assassin's violent aura, she was overcome with despair. She had hoped that the Hell Legion's experts and Zero Wing's 5 experts, those that had fully unlocked their mana bodies, would be enough to suppress mythology's invading experts, but seeing these black-clad players now, she found the idea laughable. A peak expert that was as powerful as a Grand Lord ranked archaic species could even toy with a Tier 4 summoned creature. After all, players' combat techniques allowed them to push their combat power to its limits, perhaps even beyond them. Aside from the Starlight Fortress's divine dragon, no one in the fortress could stop the assassin before her. An advanced battle array? Shifeng muttered when he saw the divine runes coating the assassin youth's body. You seem to know a lot, bastard, but that won't change anything. Licking his lips, the assassin youth continued, Now, I'll teach you just how foolish your decision was. The assassin then took a step forward, instantly vanishing. Neither he nor his aura could be found within the bar. It was as if he had never been there in the first place. I guess Zero Wing's guild leader is going to die, Crow, Stormheart's commander, said, closing his eyes. Not only did that young assassin have basic attributes that could rival a Grand Lord ranked archaic species, but he could also completely conceal his presence. Crow couldn't even sense the youth's life aura. With such capabilities, that assassin was practically invincible among players. Fights between experts were typically so fast that they were impossible to follow with the naked eye. Thus, experts usually had to rely on all 5 senses during combat. Otherwise, their opponent would quickly overwhelm them. Now that the assassin youth had vanished, players couldn't rely on their sight to keep up with his ghostly speed. Trying to keep up was a joke. How was one supposed to find an enemy they couldn't even detect? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. However, at the moment mythology's assassin had vanished, Shifeng unhurriedly unsheathed Killing Ray and slashed the empty air to his right. Boom. Suddenly, the sound of clashing metal filled the Starlight Bar, and an intense impact shattered the ground. All players within 30 yards of the swordsman stumbled back from the shockwave. Almost as everyone heard the first collision, another loud bang followed. A figure then slammed into the wall to Shifeng's right, indenting the wall. It was none other than the assassin youth that had only disappeared a moment ago. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.